You've been lied to. Not by China. By your own damn translators. And before you roll your eyes and think this is another conspiracy theory, let me tell you something. I was in the room. I heard it happen. I watched Western officials nod and smile while the most important economic announcement of the decade flew right over their heads. September 2019. Washington, D.C. International Monetary Fund Annual Meeting. Some boring-ass conference room tucked away from the main plenary hall. About 80 people scattered around central bankers, finance ministry officials, IMF staff, a few academics who probably had better places to be. The session was titled Monetary Policy Coordination in Emerging Markets. Standard IMF fare. Not the main event. Not the headline panel. Just another box to check on the conference schedule. Gang, governor of the People's Bank of China, stands up. Speaks in Mandarin. Professional translator, UN-level expert who'd worked G20 summits and high-stakes diplomatic negotiations, renders his words into English for the room through their headsets. Then something happened that never happens at these meetings. The translator paused. Just for a second. A split-second hesitation that most people probably didn't even notice. But I noticed, because I speak Mandarin. I was taking notes on central bank communication patterns, and I heard both versions simultaneously. Here's what Gang said in Chinese. We are not asking permission. We are informing you of what is already in motion. Here's what came through the English headsets. We hope to cooperate with international partners on these initiatives. You see the goddamn problem. From declaration to request. From certainty to aspiration. From power to politeness. From this is happening right now to maybe someday if you're okay with it. The Western officials in the room heard the softened version. They nodded politely. They smiled. Some went back to checking their phones. One guy I could see was literally shopping for running shoes on his laptop. They had absolutely no idea what just happened. They didn't hear the real message. And you know what's terrifying? This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some rookie translator screwing up. This wasn't incompetence. This is how the game works, and you've been losing for years without even knowing there was a game being played. The pattern you didn't notice. Let me break down what actually went down in that room over those 22 minutes. Gang spoke for exactly 22 minutes. His slides were in English standard IMF practice. His spoken remarks were in Mandarin. And the translation pattern I'm about to show you didn't happen once. It didn't happen twice. It happened systematically. Over and over and over again. Example 1. Gang Mandarin. The Yuan will function as a settlement currency for Belt and Road trade corridors by 2022. This is not contingent on Western approval. Translator English. We are exploring the possibility of Yuan-denominated trade agreements in the Belt and Road framework. Example 2. Gang Mandarin. We have secured currency swap agreements with 28 central banks. The infrastructure is operational. Translator English. We are working to establish currency cooperation mechanisms with partner countries. Example 3. Gang Mandarin. The digital Yuan pilot begins in 4 cities next month. This is the implementation phase. Translator English. China is considering various approaches to central bank digital currency. Example 4. Gang Mandarin. Cross-border payment systems using CIPS are processing transactions in 182 countries. Volume has increased 340 since 2017. Translator English. We continue to develop our international payment infrastructure. Every single time. Assertive statements became tentative explorations. Declarations of completed actions became aspirational goals. Specific data points became vague generalizations. Already done became maybe someday. Operational became under development. I wrote in my notes, systematic softening. This wasn't incompetence. The translator was excellent. Probably one of the top 50 Mandarin English translators in the world. These are the people who translate for heads of state, who handle nuclear treaty negotiations, who don't make mistakes. But something was being systematically changed in translation. And the room only heard the English version. I started tracking specific phrases across the session. Mandarin, yijing already / has been completed. English translation is being developed / is under consideration. Mandarin, jingyao will definite future. English translation may / could potentially. Mandarin, womanjuding wmin juding. We have decided. English translation, we are exploring the option of this is linguistic alchemy. Turning certainty into uncertainty. Turning facts into possibilities. Turning announcements into suggestions. And it's not just at IMF meetings. Over the next 2 days of that conference, I attended 3 other panels where Chinese officials spoke through translators. The exact same pattern repeated. When Chinese officials described completed actions, translators used future tense. When they stated intentions, translators added qualifiers like possibly, potentially, under consideration. When they used directive language, translators softened it to collaborative language. It's a protective instinct. Professional translators know that in international settings, direct statements can sound aggressive. They can create diplomatic incidents. They can make headlines that derail negotiations. So translators default to hedging, to softening, to making assertive declarations sound like collaborative proposals. But in this case, I admit that Western officials were hearing a fundamentally different message than what was being said. You heard what you expected to hear. After the session ended, I approached a senior economist I knew from the US Treasury Department. He'd been in the room, sitting 3 rows ahead of me, taking notes on his tablet. I asked, "What did you think of Yi Gang's presentation?" He shrugged. "Pretty standard stuff. China's still pushing Yuan internationalization. We've been hearing that song and dance for years. They want it, but the market doesn't. Their capital controls make it impossible." I said, "Did you catch the timeline he laid out? Digital Yuan pilot starting next month. Currency swaps operational with 28 countries. Belt and Road Yuan settlement by 2022. CIPS processing in 182 countries." He looked at me. "That's aspirational. They've been talking about this stuff since 2015. Implementation is always the problem with China. They announce big plans, then reality hits." I opened my notes, showed him what Yi Gang actually said in Mandarin, the original Chinese, not the English translation that came through the headsets. His expression changed, not dramatically, but I saw it. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way he leaned in. "That's not what I heard through the headset." "I know," I said. He took out his phone, took a photo of my notes, then said something that perfectly captures the problem. "Even if that's what he said, it doesn't mean they can do it. China's system isn't ready for that level of financial openness. The technical infrastructure alone would take years. They're describing a wish list, not a roadmap. That's the trap. That's the assumption that makes all of this work." Western policymakers assumed China was describing fantasies, aspirational goals, long-term wishes that would never materialize because their system isn't ready, because the technology doesn't exist, because market forces won't allow it. And the softened translation reinforced that assumption perfectly. Because when you hear, "We hope to cooperate with international partners," it sounds like a request. It sounds tentative. It sounds like something that requires negotiation, consensus building, Western approval. But when you hear, "We are informing you of what is already in motion," that's completely different. That's a statement of fact. That's a timeline being announced. That's a done deal being communicated. You just didn't hear it. And here's the kicker. By October 2020, just 1 year later, the digital Yuan pilot was operational in 6 cities. By 2021, CIPS was processing over 80 million transactions. By 2022, Yuan-denominated settlements in Belt and Road countries increased 300. Everything Yi Gang said was actually happening. On schedule. As announced. Western officials were just shocked when it materialized, because they never heard the original announcement. Why this happens, this translation problem isn't random. It's not isolated. It's structural. It's baked into how US-China communication works at the highest levels of government and finance. And it creates a systematic blind spot that costs you money, power, and strategic advantage. Pattern 1. Chinese directive language sounds aggressive in English. Mandarin is a high-context language. Directness is expected in formal settings. When a Chinese official states a decision, it's presented as fact. This is not considered rude, it's considered clear, professional, appropriate. English, especially in diplomatic contexts, values hedging. Politeness requires qualifiers. Certainty sounds aggressive. We might consider sounds more diplomatic than we have decided. We hope to explore sounds more collegial than we will implement. So when translators render Chinese statements into English, they often add softening language not to mistranslate, but to avoid the statement sounding confrontational or aggressive to Western ears. Result: Western audiences hear tentativeness where Chinese audiences hear determination. You hear suggestion where they hear decision. You hear possibility where they hear certainty. Pattern 2. Implementation language gets obscured. Chinese bureaucratic language distinguishes clearly between stages of implementation. Kalirjong kolzhing equals under consideration jambejong zhnbizhing equals being prepared srdanjiadon shdng duin equals pilot phases sur yshsh equals implemented. These are distinct stages with specific meanings in Chinese policy communication. But in translation, these often collapse to generic phrases like being developed or under consideration. Result: you don't realize when something has moved from planning to execution. You don't catch when a project shifts from maybe someday to happening next month. You miss the signal that changes everything. Pattern 3. The assumption of impossibility. When Chinese officials describe ambitious plans, Western analysts often assume they're aspirational fantasies. Because implementation seems impossible given China's system constraints, capital controls, technological limitations. So even when the translation is accurate, the message gets filtered through this assumption. They want to do this, but they can't actually do it. This creates confirmation bias. Information that fits the assumption China struggles with implementation gets remembered and emphasized. Information that contradicts it, China built the infrastructure faster than expected, gets dismissed as anomalous or explained away. The combination of softened translation plus assumption of impossibility creates a double filter. The message gets weakened twice. Once in translation, once in interpretation. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's too late. The cost of not listening here is what this translation gap actually means in real terms. When China implements something you thought was aspirational, it's perceived as sudden, aggressive, unexpected, a departure from previous statements. Headlines call it China's surprise move. Analysts call it escalation. Policymakers scramble to respond to something they should have seen coming months ago. But from China's perspective, they announced it. They provided timelines. They described the infrastructure. They explained the implementation phases. They gave you the roadmap. They told you what they were doing. You just didn't hear it. And this pattern keeps happening. It's not isolated to 2019. It's ongoing. 2021. BOA Forum for Asia. Chinese financial officials discussed plans for expanding digital currency interoperability with other central banks. The English translation emphasized international cooperation and mutual consultation. The Mandarin version outlined technical specifications, pilot programs with specific countries, and implementation timelines. Western coverage: China talks about digital currency cooperation. What was actually said: China has begun technical integration pilots with Hong Kong, Thailand, and UAE central banks. Full operational capacity by Q2 2022. 2022, G20 finance ministers meeting Chinese representatives discussed Yuan's role in commodity pricing. The English summary used phrases like exploring possibilities for alternative settlement mechanisms. The Mandarin version discussed executed pilot programs for yuan-denominated oil purchases with Saudi Arabia, yuan pricing for Russian natural gas, and expansion timelines for metals trading. Western coverage: China continues to promote yuan internationalization. What was actually said: we have processed 14 billion in yuan-denominated energy transactions in Q1. Infrastructure for metals trading is operational. 2023 BRICS Summit discussions: Chinese representatives outlined architectural frameworks for BRICS financial mechanisms. Western media reported it as BRICS considering dollar alternative unlikely to materialize soon. Chinese state media reported specific institutional proposals, technical working groups, and draft timelines for pilot programs. 6 months later, when BRICS announced concrete plans, Western analysts called it a surprising development. The pattern persists. And each time, Western policymakers and analysts are caught off guard when theoretical discussions become operational realities. Not because China was hiding anything, but because you weren't hearing what was actually being said. The realization, I still think about that translator's pause. That split-second hesitation in September 2019. That moment where I heard what Yi Gang said in Mandarin, and then, half a second later, heard what the room heard in English. And I realized language isn't just communication. It's interpretation. It's filtering. It's strategic advantage. Because if your opponent doesn't fully understand what you're saying, not because you're hiding it, but because translation softens it, because their assumptions filter it, because they're not paying attention, you gain time. Time to build. Time to implement. Time to create facts on the ground. By the time they realize what you said, it's already operational. The infrastructure is built. The agreements are signed. The transactions are processing. That's not deception. That's not some brilliant 4D chess move. It's clarity lost in translation. And in geopolitics, what you don't hear can cost you everything. You're sitting in meetings where the most important message in the room is the one nobody actually hears. You're nodding politely while listening to a softened version of reality. You're making policy decisions based on translations that filter assertiveness into aspiration. You're assuming impossibility when the construction crews are already working. And then you're shocked when China does exactly what they said they would do. But here's the thing that should really piss you off. You weren't deceived. You weren't lied to. You were told. Directly. With timelines and specifics. You just didn't hear the real message. You heard the version that got softened in translation. The version that got filtered through your assumptions. The version that your translator thought would sound more diplomatic to Western ears. And that split-second pause before "we are informing you" became "we hope to cooperate." That's the sound of strategic advantage being handed over. One mistranslation at a time. One softened phrase at a time. One missed signal at a time. Until you wake up one day and realize the world changed while you were nodding politely in a conference room, listening to the wrong version of what was being said. That's not China winning. That's you losing by not listening.